Do Burnley and Sheffield United have what it takes to make it in the Premier League? In today's video, we're going to be exploring those very factors. We're also going to be putting their current squads to the test in FIFA 23, putting them into a full season simulation in the Premier League and seeing whether or not they go ahead and survive. Did the same thing previously with Ipswich and Plymouth, who we've got coming up to the Championship. But there's a lot of interesting debates to be had around both Burnley and Sheffield United. We'll be taking a bit of a deeper dive into their season so far, where they'll look to strengthen going into the summer and things like that. And any Burnley or Sheffield United fans, I'd welcome your thoughts in the comments down below. But without any further ado, let's jump in. And so we will start out with Burnley, the Championship champions, with 101 points to their name. What I thought was interesting was, before Burnley, there have been 5 other Championship sides to have accumulated more than 100 points. And all of those sides, none of them ended up being relegated in the following season in the Premier League. We had Fulham in 2001, who went on to finish 13th in the Premier League, Leicester in 2014, who went on to finish 14th in the Premier League, Newcastle 2010, who finished 12th in the Premier League, Sunderland in 2000, who went on to finish 7th in the Premier League, and then Reading, the record breakers, in 2007, went on to finish 8th in the Premier League in the following season. So there's a clear trend of sides who do get and accumulate over 100 points in the Championship, that first year in the Premier League tends to be a pretty successful one, where they do ride that wave of momentum. What separates, and I've often said it throughout the season, their good and great Championship sides is getting above that 100 point threshold, and we've seen Burnley doing just that this season. So already going off those stats, I think that Burnley are in pretty good standings. Let's not also forget that Burnley had 6 consecutive top flight seasons before they were eventually relegated last time. Ultimately, it was a lack of investment which caught up with them and really hamstrung Dyche and the squad that he was working with towards the end, where I think relegation was the inevitable outcome of that. But plenty has changed since then. This new ownership model has come in, and to be fair, has shown serious ambition with the players they lost in the previous window coming down into the Championship, the complete squad rebuild that they've done, and now how comfortable all these players are and integrated into this Vincent Kompany system. I think it makes for a really exciting prospect heading into the Premier League. There have been, for me, 4 players who have been on loan this season at Burnley who have been key to the way they've played and have really chipped in to this promotion push. There have been a couple of others there, but I've not included them as they've not been regulars week in, week out. One of those key loanees has been Jordan Bayer, absolutely fantastic, one of the best defensive options in the Championship this season, and Burnley have already got him on a permanent basis. They had it in his contract to turn that loan deal into a permanent, so that's already one of their 4 crucial loanees who's already snapped up beyond this season. Burnley are then left to replace 3 quality players, and there's no denying that, in Taylor Harwood-Bellis, Ian Matston and Nathan Tella. Each of them would demand, I'd imagine, a pretty hefty price tag if Burnley were to sign any of those players on a permanent basis, but I do think there's a chance, especially with a couple of them. In the instance of Nathan Tella, Southampton have just been relegated to the Championship, and I think we can all envisage a situation where there will be a little bit of a fire sale in that squad over the summer, as their best talents are cherry-picked by Premier League clubs, and someone like Tella with the already established relationship with Burnley. I think there's a strong chance that something in terms of a permanent deal does come in the summer if Burnley can strike a decent enough deal with Southampton and they deem it to be good value for money. I also think in the instance of Taylor Harwood-Bellis, I think there's a very high possibility that we could see a similar deal to how Burnley bargained for Muric in the end, getting him on a permanent basis but potentially having that buyback clause in there for Manchester City. But there are a few other Premier League clubs who are interested. Newcastle, one of late, who I've seen sniffing around him, so there'll definitely be competition for that signing. Ian Matston, on the other hand, I'm not sure. Out of the loanees who they could feasibly get back, I just have a feeling that he could be in and around that Chelsea first team next season. Obviously, Taylor Harwood-Bellis has been, magnificent this season and playing at just as good a level, if not even higher. But because the threshold to get in and around that Manchester City squad is so high compared to Chelsea at the moment, I do think that they'll have weighed up how well he's done out on loan this season, and maybe he's ready for that next step in his development. But very much depends on what the long-term plan at Chelsea is with Mark Cucurella and Ben Chilwell. But out of the three loanees, I could see them getting Teller on a permanent basis, maybe Howard Bellis on another loan deal, and I'm not too sure about Maatsen. But that's my personal view. I'd be interested to hear some Burnley fans on how realistic you think it would be to get back any of those players. So other than replacing or retaining the loanees, where Burnley need to improve going into the Premier League, a striker is the priority position. It has to be. Losing Ashley Barnes and how well he actually did in that championship season to adapt to this Vincent Kompany style of play, it's going to be absolutely imperative. Of course, they do have a decision to make on Weghorst. That'll be very interesting. Can't see him sticking around at United or United wanting to keep him, and I'm not sure how the feeling is between him and the club right now. So whether they look to cash in on him and then use a bit of that money to reinvest, that's a priority position. And do you know what? I can't help but feel like someone like a Victor Gyökeres from Coventry would be perfect for this Burnley side. How he likes to drift into those wide areas. The link-up play is really good. That's important in this sort of Vincent Kompany system. And he could also play in one of those wide roles. You know, we've seen the majority of Burnley's goals this season coming from those wide areas with Maatsen, Tellers, Rory all chipping in with them. Someone like a Gyökeres could play a number of roles in that Burnley side, and I think he's ready for that next jump up if Coventry aren't to be promoted this season. They also have an excellent manager in Vincent Kompany as well, so all in all, I'm fairly positive about Burnley's chances for survival next season, but still a lot of work is needed to be done. Flipping over then to Sheffield United, and they've been on a slightly different trajectory to that of Burnley and head up into the Premier League with a different set of circumstances which will dictate how they go on to do next season. Obviously, this has been Sheffield United's second season back in the Championship following a couple of years that they had in the Premier League. Their first season back in the Championship, the 21-22 season, was a real rollercoaster ride for them. Slavisa Jokanovic was the manager first of all entrusted with that squad to get them back up at the first time of asking, and to be honest, it was a little bit of a disastrous start. He was ultimately sacked in November. All the way up until January, Sheffield United were in the bottom half of the Championship table that season, and at the time Paul Heckingbottom wasn't a very popular opinion. Certainly the masses really raised an eyebrow at that appointment, but he took them on a run towards the end of that season, ultimately secured a playoff finish, which they then went on to lose against Nottingham Forest in the semi-finals on a penalty shootout. But why this season has been so important for Sheffield United is because, and I truly believe this, each season that a team from the Premier League comes down, they have those 3 years of parachute payments, and I think that as each season goes by, it does get harder and harder to keep yourself relevant at the top of the table, and eventually, once those payments do run out and you need to disassemble, you know, the majority of your squad, you can just fall into obscurity. I mean, we've seen it with Stoke, who I'd say are a good example after the parachute payments run off and they had to balance the books a little bit with the outgoings they had at that club. They've ultimately had, you know, consecutive bottom half finishes since they've been in the Championship. We've seen other clubs slip even further than that, right down to League One. So this season was absolutely imperative for the Blades to get right, and credit to the people behind the scenes, and especially Paul Heckingbottom and that squad for getting the job done this season. Speaking about key loanees this season for the Sheffield United side who they will need to replace going up into the Premier League, I think we're predominantly focusing on the Manchester City loanees, Tommy Doyle and James McAtee, both of which who really sort of came into play during the second half of the season when they started to influence things. When the Blades had a little bit of a dip, they each came into the side and really uplifted their fortunes towards the end of the year and got them over the line. Now, from a Manchester City point of view, it'll be fascinating to see what their future planning is with both McAtee and Doyle. In terms of Doyle, this was his third loan spell out from Manchester City. Had a short stint in Germany and then a spell with Cardiff and now Sheffield United. And in terms of McAtee, who plays a lot more advanced midfield, this was his first ever loan away from Manchester City. There have been some reports regarding McAtee that Manchester City would perhaps prefer a loan move to a different Premier League club next season, who's maybe going to be a little bit more on the front foot, as we expect the Blades to be a little bit more defensive, making that step up to the Premier League. But from what I've seen on social media from the player side itself and things like that, it seems like both players are very much keeping their options open. But I think it is the Premier League rule that dictates you're only allowed one loanee from a Premier League club, so they'd sort of have to pick and choose between them, I suppose, if any of them were to become available, that is. The biggest roadblock that the Blades will run into in the summer is the future of the ownership, what that will mean for the budget set out to improve this side and ultimately make it competitive for the Premier League. Because I do weigh up that Blade squad next to the Burnley team pound for pound. I look at the players who I think will be able to step up and make it with that Premier League quality. I do think Sheffield United are a ways behind Burnley at the moment. Talking about priority positions that they will need to strengthen, I think that left side of their defence will need to be looked into, add more depth both from the centre half and wing back position. Midfield's an obvious one with the two Man City loanees going back and re-adding that energy into the side, and then another centre forward who's going to be able to play around Iliman Ndiaye, who's also going to be crucial for them next season. Sheffield United know more than most that getting the recruitment spot on is absolutely pivotal. We saw that was where they ultimately went wrong in their second season in the Premier League. While they definitely don't want to overspend their means to, gamble on, some massive Hollywood signings or anything like that, what they do need to do is sufficiently support Heckingbottom with the added quality and depth that this squad is obviously crying out for at the moment. But those are a few of the intricacies that I think Sheffield United will be looking into in the summer. I'd be particularly keen to know from some Blade fans, how do you see it right now heading into next season with the players you currently have contracted? But those were my overall summaries on both the Blades and Burnley. Before we go ahead and wrap up, let's go ahead and put both teams into a FIFA simulation and see how they do. So what I've gone ahead and done is dropped both Burnley and Sheffield United into the Premier League on this simulation, as Southampton and Leicester are the bottom two in real life right now. Those are the teams that I have replaced them with. Obviously we will have one more side going up and down depending on how the final few weeks of the Premier League goes and the Championship playoffs. But today's video we're just going to be testing the strength of this Burnley and Sheffield United squad. So let's simulate to the end of the season and see how they do. Alright guys, so the simulation is now complete. Man City winning the league, not too many surprises in there, but let's see where our two newly promoted clubs have landed up. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that it is near the bottom of the table, as we are working with two Championship squads here. So neither of them working with a top half finish, understandably so. We creep further and further towards the relegation zone. Bournemouth surviving again, Brentford surviving, Leeds in this simulation staying up, Forest, and then we've got Burnley in that first relegation spot, which, I mean, oh my god, that's incredibly tight if this was to happen in real life. Burnley going down on 29 points and Forest surviving by the skin of their teeth thanks to goal difference. Forest minus 25, Burnley minus 26. So not the greatest of campaigns back. Who else have we got going down? Brighton, their squad must have been picked apart in this season. And then Sheffield United making up the rest at the bottom of the table. 24 points. I believe that's how many points Sunderland are actually on in real life in the Premier League right now. So as the squads are right now, FIFA has Sheffield United 20th in the Premier League next season and Burnley 18th, and just going down based on their goal difference. In terms of the key players for Burnley, it's Jay Rodriguez and Josh Brownhill both chipping in with double figures in terms of goals. Ashley Barnes, obviously he won't be there next season, but 3 appearances, 2 goals for him. In terms of Sheffield United, struggling a little bit more in terms of the firepower, but Ryan Brewster does get into double figures. Will we see him reviving his Sheffield United career in the Premier League next season? Let's find out. Daniel Jebison getting 6, and Iliman Ndiaye, who I think most people are excited to see in the Premier League next season, just getting the 4 goals, no assists. But obviously that simulation was just for a little bit of fun. Still plenty of business to be done before now and the start of the Premier League season for both Burnley and Sheffield United to go ahead and strengthen their squads and survival chances for next season. If you guys had to call it right now early on, where do you see both of those sides landing? I think we've had a pretty weak bottom 5 or 6 in the Premier League this season, to be honest. So I think there's every chance that the teams going up to the Premier League this time around do have a really good stab at surviving. The 3 sides that went up from the Championship last season have a very strong chance of all surviving now. But guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you did go to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for some regular Championship content. Apart from that, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.